Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending, whether you guys are attending live or on our pre-recorded instance of this webinar. Thank you so much for joining. This is a series of webinars. The theme is Winning in 2021, and we are focusing this year with this theme in trying to help our clients and partners improve on business health, business performance, and organizational alignment. And today, we want to talk about state and local funding, which is coming from the American Recovery Plan that was signed in March of 2021. Most of our state and local governments have begun to receive their funding. So many of you have a good idea of the salient points and key topics as it pertains to the American Rescue Plan, the ARP. But what we want to do today is just highlight what we call fun facts or just information that may be usable to you. And also we want to focus a bit on best practices for dissemination of funds. Again, this is being sponsored by iSeek Solutions, a group of expert consultants keenly focused in on implementing solutions for their clients and meeting their strategic goals and objectives. And the team of experts at iSeek are very astute in looking at people, process, and technology and making sure that those areas align to your strategic goals and objectives. So again, my name is Mike Dale. I am a senior consultant with iSeek, and we'll spend the next 30 minutes focusing on the ARP and some very high level points. And so we won't hit all of the exhaustive points. We won't do that in 30 minutes, but we will have it, however, look at some of the points that we think should be sort of articulated to you as state and local leaders or agencies or entities working with your municipality, your city or your county or your state in the process of disseminating these funds or receiving these funds. So a little bit of house cleaning notes or housekeeping notes. You should see the chat button at the bottom of your screen. And I'd like you to submit a question or a topic that you'd like me to cover during this short segment of 30 minutes as it pertains to COVID Fiscal Recovery Funds or the American Rescue Plan. However, of course, we all understand that we cannot cover all of the essential points. So also, if you'd like, send a private chat and put your email in there and your question or topic. If you'd like some follow-up, some one-on-one follow-up to provide some consultancy or advisory around one of the topics that we have not expounded on today. But let's go ahead and talk about the American Rescue Plan. And so we all know by now that the ARP consists of $1.9 trillion of economic stimulus and pandemic recovery, emergency recovery aid monies. And of those monies, we also know that a substantial allocation of that $1.9 trillion has been allocated to states, counties, cities, governments, territories, and non-entitlement units of local government for the sum total of $350 billion. And again, we'll talk through some of the essential points of how this money is sort of assigned to be used by state and local government. But we know that we won't be able to get through the exhaustive list of provisions. We'll have at the end of this presentation a slide that provides contact information for us, for I6 Solutions and myself, but also contact information for Department of Treasury, some of the interim final rule information that's out there that acts as a guideline or guardrails to this legislation. Also information about Treasury facts, the FAQs that answer a lot of common questions as it pertains to these funds and the dissemination of these funds. So it's very important to kind of start out the conversation about state and local government and what state and local government should be looking at first. And that would be the guardrails. We call them the guardrails. And the guardrails are for the 4 areas of eligible spending, and then the portion of the provision that talks about ineligible spending or non-allowable spending, if you will. And so what you'll see in the IFR, the interim final rule, again, which is the provision, the exhaustive provision that looks at the provisional rule that explains exhaustively how this money should be spent by the recipients who get the money. You'll see guardrails and you'll see lots of information, but for the purposes of this short webinar, we just wanted to hit the 4 salient eligible spending categories. We know, of course, supporting the public health response is number 1. Those mitigation efforts, medical expenses, any healthcare, public health and safety type of programs, agencies or even private entities that submit requests for funds to you as state and local administrations to support the public health response. That's going to be an eligible area of expense. Of course, addressing the negative economic impact. We're talking about responding to the economic harms of workers, families, small businesses impacted by the pandemic and by the economic downturn. Number 2, we look at the replacement of public sector revenue loss. So these funds specifically should be used and should be disseminated to government agencies and for government services to remediate the reduction of revenue that has been experienced due to the pandemic. And so there's guidelines, again, there's guardrails that are exhaustively looked at and explained in the IFR, the interim final rule. And so be careful to really take special care and attention to the restrictions around revenue loss as it pertains to your municipality. Number 3, the premium pay for essential workers. That should offer additional support to those who have and will bear the greatest health risks due to the pandemic. And we know that our essential workers have borne the brunt of what has happened over the last year and a half in this pandemic. And there are funds allowable under this allocation for premium pay to pay workers for the work that they're doing to remediate the healthcare pandemic, to respond to the healthcare pandemic. And if you look at the IFR, you'll also see where some of the funds can be retroactively utilized for the effect that these essential workers had bore prior to the signing of this legislation. And so it's, again, very important, of course, not in this short webinar, but if we have more follow-up, or if you want to go to the IFR, there's plenty of exhaustive information to talk to you about the parameters in terms of retroactive spending for these funds. Lastly, are the water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure spending eligibility. We know that we need to make the necessary investments to improve our access to clean water, invest in waste water, invest in stormwater infrastructure, and provide to the unserved and the underserved. So that's very important that we work within the confines of that allowable expense area. And we'll talk even more about that in particular. There's a fun fact that we'll divulge as it pertains to water, sewer, and broadband that a lot of folks haven't picked up on, but maybe you'll do it today. So let's go ahead and look at just a couple of examples of allowable uses. You'll see that on the left side, or the left column of bullet points, allowable expenses or uses for this funding will be targeted around the pandemic response. And that would be vaccination support, testing around the virus, quarantining, getting out the word through public communications, all of the things that we've been doing, or state and local government, along with the federal government, have been doing for the last year and a half. And this is an opportunity to get the funding in terms of the public service and programs that cities and states have been spending their own general fund money on. On the right side of this slide, right side of bullet points, you see items that are allowable uses for funding that have more to do with, I'd say, household. And those would be digital literacy. These are things that we talk about at the kitchen table. Internet access for our rural communities who have been suffering for lack of broadband even prior to the pandemic. So this is a great opportunity for some of these items. The allocation that your state, your county, your city will be getting to work on some long-awaited needs as it pertains to your municipality. So we can't talk about eligible uses for these recovery funds if we don't talk about ineligible uses. And so, again, we use the terminology around restrictions and guardrails because restrictions and guardrails will help us ensure that the funds are used to augment existing activities and address pressing needs. However, we want to steer clear of what may be in ineligible use, because if we as local and state leaders approve the dissemination of funds to recipients who use the funds in an ineligible way, then there'll have to be payback parameters assessed to them. So we want to be educated so that we can non-qualify the dissemination of funds to recipients from the top. And then if the funds, after we've approved them, or after you've approved them, if they're being ineligibly spent, then we can have those monitoring and controls into place so that we can have the right touch points with the recipients to keep them from going through the payback parameters. So yeah, these are 6 areas of ineligible uses, all very specific as it pertains to areas within the interim final rule of this provision, this legislation, that you as a government in your public service spending or public program spending or your dissemination to recipients should steer clear away from. And of course, it's very exhaustively looked at in terms of the provisional rule. As you look at that provisional rule, you'll see examples, more definition around these 6 areas of ineligible use. So do pay close attention and follow up on each of these. So let's talk about what I'll call fun facts, only because, you know, the interim final rule, which is very exhaustive, lots of examples, parameters around the spending, ineligible uses, eligible uses, is very, very broad. And so we thought we'd sort of extract a few fun facts out of the interim final rule and out of the legislation that you may or may not be aware of. And so the fun fact number 1 is city governments receive a single payment, certain city governments or certain governments. So, you know, that comes from the fact that generally, as it pertains to what we have been told and what we've read and what we've assumed, is that for all governments, there'll be 2 tranches of monies disseminated to local and state governments through the Fiscal Recovery Plan. One that would come in May, which, if you are a state or local leader, you have absolutely requested your funds by now, and they've been sent to you, at least that first tranche. And then the second tranche will come 12 months later. Well, that's not always the case for all governments. Matter of fact, states that have experienced certain levels of increase to their unemployment rate can receive all of the tranches, the 2 tranches, in one single payment. And so that's pretty good information. We know that money today is more valuable than money tomorrow. So, you know, states, local leaders and governments would probably like to get the money in one tranche. And so if you are not aware of this parameter within the provision, it's maybe something that you should take a look at. Fun fact number 2, funds will support climate change projects. So I spoke earlier that I'd have something interesting to talk about in terms of the eligible spending area of water, sewer, and infrastructure. So underwater, sewer, and infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, the fiscal recovery plans will allow climate change projects. And when we talk about climate change, we talk about clean water, we talk about disposal of waste projects. These are funding initiatives that can be funded through the Fiscal Recovery Funds, the ARP. And again, it falls under the water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure eligible use area of the bill. So again, there's some discretion there, but our advocates around clean water, clean air will be very interested in submitting a request for funds under this provision. Fun fact number 3, metro cities under block grants are allowed to be labeled as metro cities. So let me sort of explain that. So under the Community Development Block Grant, which many communities, many cities, municipalities have participated, are participating, and through the intricacies of that program, some cities who may not have been metropolitan cities through other labels or statutory definitions, they are being labeled in the ARP as metro cities because they qualified as metro cities under the block grant. So the block grant is actually being used in a definitional way within the ARP provision to label cities as metro cities. So what that may mean is that some cities may have some preference, some additional provision if they can be labeled as metro cities. And so it's important if you are a city that has not been labeled outside of the block grant as metro, but within the block grant as metro. This is information that you need to sort of peel away and understand, because again, there may be preference and certain information that you need to understand in order to get additional funds or better provision of allocation of funds. Fun fact number 4, reimbursement prior to ARP. So, funds, generally speaking, are forward-looking, meaning that the epidemic response to the virus, things we looked at in terms of the allowable uses, those things are projects that will kick off day one or in the future. However, the ARP does provide for reimbursements. And not only do those reimbursements can happen for the local and state public recipients of the government, but it also can be applied as assistance and recovery for households and for small businesses. When you look at households, you look at rent, you look at mortgage, utility assistance for the economic harms that many families have experienced in the course of this pandemic. And so, you should have agencies, you should have entities who are representing our residents, representing constituents, who will provide for this allocation or this sort of reimbursement of their funding or reimbursement of the expenses that folks have suffered in terms of economic harm. So this is an important fun fact to look at as a provision of the ARP. Another fun fact, number 5, getting cash for vaccination. So I don't know about you guys, but I know when I went and got my vaccination, I wasn't offered any cash, wasn't offered any information as it pertains to incentives, but it looks like you can get cash for vaccinations. In fact, there are incentive programs out there, or in-kind transfers, or lottery programs that can be used to promote folks getting their vaccination. So funds can be used in that way. And then lastly, fact number 6, this is more of an important key that state and local governments should be aware of. As you probably have done a cursory review of the interim final rule, or you may have delved into it deeply, but you'll see that there's reporting that needs to be done in terms of monitoring and controlling the dissemination of funds, the funds that are being received by requesters. And these are just 3 of the probably most key reports that state and local leaders should be aware of. The reports have more to do with your population, have to do with the amount of the awards or the sub-awards. And so we should absolutely look at the guidelines as it pertains to these reports so that we can comply to the federal government. And that is with understanding that there will always be some interim or ad hoc report requests from the Department of Treasury from the standpoint of gathering data for the dissemination of funds. Okay, so those are all the fun facts. So we're wrapping up on time here. We wanted to give a few best practices for the dissemination of funds. And we see where we have a group that you're well familiar with, the Brookings Institute. They provide standard practices, best practices, policies, and procedures that have been tried and approved by state, local government, federal government, and they have developed and publicized a three-pronged approach. And that three-pronged approach considers stabilizing the government, strategizing, and then organizing. And so if you look at stabilizing the government, we know that our cities, our municipalities, many of them have operated at a deficit to begin with. And so in these unserved or underserved communities, this is an opportunity. These funds are an opportunity to come out of the red, to plug the hole in general fund budgets, and return employees that work for the city or the state, return them back to full operation. And many of our communities are not at full operations as it pertains to some of the public safety, the public services. So this is an opportunity to use those funds for those reasons to stabilize government. Number two, strategize. So after stabilizing government, cities, states should look at strategic projects. We always talk about dilapidated infrastructure and property, even agencies and operations programs that haven't gotten funding in a very, very long time. And those are the programs and areas who have suffered the most. The unserved and underserved fell further behind during the last year and a half of the pandemic. So this is an opportunity to use these funds as state and local leaders to first plug the hole, and then secondly, strategically answer some of the needs that are out there for our public. And then lastly, organize. So when we talk about organizing, we talk about identifying what are the broad investments, what are the shared commitments that may cross city to city, county to county, maybe district to district, and coming together as what the Brookings Institute calls a regional recovery coordinating council. And this is something that the Brookings Institute has said that if we form these councils where city, county, some of our supporting agencies, the community, some of our non-profits or non-government organizations, and even corporate entities come together to understand the strategic needs of the municipality or the county. We can interact and make sure that we're not duplicating any spending from county to county, city to city, but we're sharing resources. And we have a sort of a committee or a group who's able to understand what sort of the sister or brother city or sister or brother county is doing. This is just a good practice to make sure that our shared communities and shared areas get the full realization of benefits. and that we're able to provide the shared healthcare response and economic recovery that they deserve. I would like to leave you with just a couple of contacts and references here. Everything that we've talked about today have come from either the legislation itself, the ARP legislation, or the provisional rule, the interim final rule. And so if you'd like to contact or either submit questions or comments, the Department of Treasury is still taking questions and comments on the rule. There's also FAQs or FAQs, and then there's the ARP Act itself. So please reach out to the Department of Treasury, or if you have questions or comments or would like consultation or advisory from iSeek Solutions, looking at how do you put together an organizational strategy and an approach to selecting, prioritizing, and disseminating these funds, please contact us. Here's my contact information, or you can reach out to info@iseeksolutionsinc.com. And we really enjoyed providing this quick presentation. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you want to reach out to us, just send us your contact information, and we'll reach back out to you. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you at the next webinar.